Imagine waking up in a world where almost every man is gone. Whole families erased. Fathers, brothers, sons, vanishing on a scale so massive it nearly rewrote human history. This isn't science fiction. It's the forgotten story hidden inside our DNA. Thousands of years ago, a catastrophe struck humanity, leaving behind mass graves, shattered skulls, and a terrifying truth. The greatest killer wasn't nature, but us. Modern genetics reveals a chilling bottleneck where nearly 95% of men disappeared, while women's lineages survived. Archaeology uncovers the evidence of massacres, mutilations, and even cannibalism. Together, they reveal the story of a world drenched in violence, one that still echoes inside us today. Picture humanity as a vast branching tree. Each twig is a family line, each branch a lineage that stretches across centuries. Normally, that tree keeps growing. New twigs sprout, old ones bend, and the canopy spreads. But sometimes something terrible happens. A storm strikes. Branches snap. Suddenly the tree is no longer lush and wide, but narrow, stripped down to just a few stubborn shoots. In genetics, that storm is called a bottleneck. It's when a population shrinks so dramatically that most of its diversity is erased forever. Bottlenecks can be caused by natural disasters, diseases, famines, or something even darker. And once a lineage disappears, it never comes back. It's like burning whole pages from the book of human history. We know our species has faced these storms before. Around 900,000 years ago, during an ice age, our ancestors nearly vanished. Perhaps only a few thousand humans survived. That ancient bottleneck nearly ended us before we truly began. But the bottleneck we're focused on now is different. It didn't happen hundreds of thousands of years ago. It happened just a few thousand years ago, during the late Neolithic. And instead of striking all humans equally, it left a very peculiar scar. It hit men, and only men. This wasn't just a small pruning of the tree. It was a massacre hidden in the DNA itself. Whole male branches were snapped off, leaving only a handful standing. If you were a man alive back then, the odds were overwhelming that your family line would end with you. And the strangest part? Women's lineages didn't just survive, they thrived. When geneticists first uncovered this pattern, they were stunned. By studying DNA from living populations across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, researchers noticed something odd. The Y chromosome, passed only from father to son, showed a devastating loss of diversity a few thousand years ago. Normally, we expect both men and women to carry traces of these ancient genetic storms. If a natural disaster or disease wipes out people, it doesn't discriminate. Both sexes suffer equally. But here the opposite happened. The mitochondrial DNA, inherited from mothers, showed no such collapse. Women's genetic lines marched on almost untouched, while men's genetic lines were nearly erased. How bad was it? Estimates suggest that across vast regions, 95% of all men were wiped out. Put another way, for every 20 men alive, only one left descendants. Imagine standing in a crowd of 100 men. By the time this bottleneck ended, only 5 of them would have passed on their genes. The numbers are staggering. Some researchers even compared it to a modern scenario. If such a collapse happened today, out of nearly 4 billion men on Earth, only about 200 million would remain to carry on their line. This revelation forced scientists to rethink what could have caused such an event. Natural catastrophes didn't fit the evidence. Epidemics, volcanic eruptions, or famine would have cut down both men and women alike. So why did men disappear in such shocking numbers while women survived? The answer points not to nature, but to humans themselves. The evidence kept circling back to one haunting possibility. This was not a disaster born of nature, but of human hands. Archaeological digs across Europe and beyond reveal chilling patterns from the late Neolithic. Mass graves, not of individuals lost to famine or disease, but of entire communities brutally wiped out. In Talheim, Germany, a pit held 34 people slaughtered with axes and arrows, many struck in the head while fleeing. In Schletz, Austria, 200 bodies were thrown into a mass grave after what looked like a raid that spared no one, except perhaps young women, who were suspiciously missing from the remains. And this wasn't isolated. From the Iberian Peninsula to Central Europe, skeletons show smashed skulls, cut marks, and injuries from weapons. Some bodies were even dismembered, defleshed, or cooked. Violence wasn't occasional. It was systemic. The DNA evidence matches this story. If women continued passing on their mitochondrial DNA, while men's Y chromosomes almost vanished, then one conclusion becomes hard to avoid. Men were being killed on a massive scale. Not just in battle, but in massacres, raids, and deliberate exterminations of rival male lineages. It's a chilling thought. For thousands of years, the dominant threat to survival wasn't wild animals, famine, or the climate. It was other humans. Neighboring groups didn't just compete. They annihilated. Imagine living in such a world. For a young man, adulthood meant facing a near certainty of violence and death before reaching middle age. For a community, survival meant wiping out rival men while capturing or assimilating women. In short, the genetic bottleneck wasn't just a scientific mystery. It was the scar of the first truly global wave of human warfare. If DNA whispers the story of the past, then bones scream it. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered more than 250 late Neolithic sites where human remains bear unmistakable marks of violence. These are not quiet burials of people who died naturally. They are evidence of slaughter, ambushes and raids. Take Talheim, Germany, around 5000 BCE. In what looks like a shallow pit, archaeologists uncovered 34 skeletons, men, women, and children. None showed defensive wounds, which means they weren't fighting back. They were running. Their killers struck with polished stone axes and blunt blows, many to the head. 30 of the skulls carried lethal trauma, often layered on top of already fatal wounds. In other words, the attackers wanted to make sure their victims were very dead. The detail that chills researchers most? Young women were absent. The implication is grim. They weren't spared out of kindness, but taken as spoils of war. Another site, Schletz in Austria, tells an even bloodier tale. There, nearly 200 victims were dumped unceremoniously into a mass grave. Again, the pattern repeated. Adult women missing, bodies showing signs of brutal force. Some victims had their limbs removed, skulls crushed or faces smashed. This wasn't random violence. It looked systematic, ritualized, and terrifyingly common. And the deeper scientists dig, the worse it gets. In Iberia, studies on 338 individuals showed that nearly a quarter bore weapon injuries. In early farming communities, more than 10% of men and women had scars from raids or battles. For men, the odds were even worse. 97% of unhealed wounds belonged to males, making it clear they were the main targets of violence. Each excavation adds another piece to the puzzle, a world where conflict wasn't the exception, but the rule. As archaeologists kept uncovering sites, a disturbing pattern emerged. Men were dying in droves, while women were disappearing. In massacre pits across Europe, adult men and adolescent boys dominate the death lists. Skulls bashed in, bones shattered, arrow wounds unhealed. In one Iberian study of 338 skeletons, men represented 97% of unhealed violent deaths. And even among those who survived attacks, the scars were mostly on male bones. This paints a stark reality. Men were expected to fight, and most did not survive. Women, however, appear less often among the dead, not because they were spared, but because they were taken. In many sites, young women are conspicuously absent from the graves, suggesting they were carried off as captives. To victorious raiders, women were not enemies to be killed, but prizes to be absorbed into the tribe, ensuring the winner's bloodline spread while their rivals' male lineages ended. The violence wasn't always simple killing either. Some sites reveal far darker acts. In Schletz, many skeletons were found with missing arms and legs or with skulls separated from their bodies. In Hershheim, Germany, victims showed evidence of ritual cannibalism, brains scooped from skulls, tongues removed, bones boiled for marrow, even flesh roasted on spits. Some bones were carved into drinking cups or ornaments, placed at the entrances of settlements like trophies. These weren't isolated horrors. Across Europe, mass killings, dismemberment, and ritualized violence repeated again and again. Together, they suggest a society where brutality wasn't just about survival. It was woven into culture, tradition, and power. For the men of this world, life was a gamble with impossible odds. For the women, survival often meant being absorbed into the very groups that had destroyed their families. The picture that emerges from these sites is grim but strangely consistent. Organized violence was the engine behind the genetic bottleneck. At Hershheim in Germany, the largest known Neolithic mass grave, archaeologists found something astonishing. at least 1,000 victims buried in over 80 pits outside a settlement. These weren't just casual killings. Skulls were systematically split, bones smashed, and evidence pointed to large-scale ritual practices. Some remains were processed as food, others turned into tools, ornaments, or even gruesome warning signs hung at village entrances. This was violence elevated into culture, destruction and domination made into tradition. What makes it even stranger is the scale. The Hershheim settlement itself may have housed fewer than 50 people, and yet they somehow orchestrated raids that left hundreds, even thousands of victims. Isotope analysis of the bones revealed a shocking diversity. Hunters, gatherers, farmers, mountain dwellers, and plains people, some from nearly 500 kilometers away. This wasn't neighborly squabbling. It was long-distance warfare. Why such relentless conflict? Many scholars point to the Neolithic revolution itself, the shift from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled farming. Agriculture created permanent villages, stockpiles of grain and herds of livestock. These settlements became irresistible targets. To survive, groups fortified themselves, built wooden palisades, and armed every man. But as populations grew, so did pressure on land and resources. Every neighbor became a threat. Another key factor was the rise of patrilineal clans, male-bonded kin groups that passed power and property down family lines. When two clans clashed, the aim wasn't just victory. It was annihilation of rival men, erasing their bloodlines, while women were absorbed to grow the victor's population. In such a system, it makes sense why the Y chromosome diversity collapsed. This wasn't chaos. It was systematic male elimination, the dark logic of Neolithic warfare. By now, the evidence points in one chilling direction. The collapse of male lineages during the late Neolithic was not an accident of nature. It was the result of human choices, systems, and strategies. But why men specifically? Why were they singled out for elimination while women survived? The answer lies in the way early societies were structured. As farming spread, communities began organizing around patrilineal clans, groups of men bound by blood who shared land, resources, and defense. Trust was built on male kinship. Outsider men, no matter how peaceful, were rarely accepted. Women, however, moved more freely between clans, often through marriage, exchange, or capture. This created a brutal dynamic. When clans clashed, the goal wasn't just to defeat the enemy. It was to erase them. Rival men were killed systematically, their genetic lines cut off forever. Women, on the other hand, were taken and absorbed, ensuring that their children would carry the DNA of the victors. Over time, this repeated cycle collapsed the diversity of the Y chromosome, while leaving maternal lines largely intact. Some researchers propose an alternative explanation, a more peaceful one. They argue that patrilineal groups might have splintered and died out naturally, a process called lineal fission. In this model, smaller kin groups of related men could disappear gradually due to environmental pressures or sheer bad luck, without requiring endless massacres. But the sheer scale of the genetic collapse, a 95% reduction in male diversity, suggests violence played a central role. Archaeology, with its mass graves and shattered bones, reinforces that conclusion. In short, the Neolithic wasn't just the birth of agriculture, it was the birth of something darker, the deliberate erasure of rival men. The Neolithic world was a patchwork of small farming villages, but beneath the surface, it was a simmering battlefield. Land wasn't just soil, it was life. Grain fields, orchards, and herds of animals meant food security, future generations, and political power. For the first time in human history, wealth could be stored and defended, and with it came a new rule of survival. Control the land, control the future. But land wasn't infinite. Populations expanded as farming fueled larger families, and villages pushed against one another's borders. Every valley, river, and pasture became contested. To hold territory, clans relied on the one thing they trusted most, male kinship. Armies weren't professional soldiers. They were brothers, fathers, and sons, bound by blood and a shared duty to defend their inheritance. This system made outside men dangerous. Any foreign male who entered a clan's territory was a potential claimant, rival, or invader. Accepting them wasn't just a social risk, it threatened the very foundation of patrilineal power. Women, on the other hand, could be integrated. either through alliance or force, because they didn't challenge male authority. They reinforced it by bearing children tied to the victor's bloodline. This is why, over generations, we see male lines vanish while female lines persist. In the logic of the time, women were resources to be absorbed, while men were obstacles to be eliminated. The archaeological record, with mass graves of men, women often spared or reabsorbed, is consistent with this chilling system. The Neolithic wasn't just about farming innovation. It was about a new social order, one where men lived and died by their kin and outsiders were erased. By the time the Neolithic dust settled, the genetic landscape of humanity had changed forever. What once was a diverse web of male lineages had been cut down to a few surviving threads. Imagine it. 19 out of 20 men's genetic stories erased, their bloodlines silenced in a single evolutionary blink. This wasn't extinction in the sense of entire species vanishing. It was subtler, quieter, and far more insidious, a genetic pruning. Clan warfare, resource competition, and the ruthless logic of patrilineal survival had reshaped humanity at its core. The men who survived weren't necessarily stronger or smarter. They were simply the ones born into the right lineage, the right clan at the right time, and yet this catastrophe left no survivors to tell the story, only bones in mass graves and the silent testimony of DNA. When we map Y chromosomes today, we're looking at the narrow genetic corridors carved out by these ancient struggles. Every man alive carries the echoes of battles fought thousands of years ago. Every lineage lost is a ghost in our ancestry. But here's the haunting question. Was it worth it? The violence, the massacres, the systematic erasure. Did it truly secure survival, or did it just replace one fragile balance with another? After all, history shows that no lineage is invincible. Empires fall, clans dissolve, and the cycle of rise and collapse repeats. The Neolithic revolution gave us farming, villages, and civilization, but also the first large-scale experiment in human domination and elimination. Its legacy is written not just in ruins and artifacts, but in the very chromosomes we carry today. The vanishing of men wasn't a mystery of nature. It was the first great war of humanity against itself. So what do we make of it all? The story of the Neolithic isn't just about farming and villages. It's about how human beings, for the first time, built systems of power that could erase entire bloodlines. We often think of war as a modern invention, armies, nations, politics. But the truth is, long before kings and empires, ordinary clans of farmers were already practicing systematic violence, reshaping the human family tree. Every man alive today carries within his DNA the scars of that ancient pruning. And every woman's lineage tells of survival, resilience, and adaptation through times of chaos. The vanishing of men wasn't a myth or a metaphor. It was real, and it changed the course of human history. But here's the haunting thought. If our ancestors could erase 95% of male lineages in just a few centuries, what other silent catastrophes are hidden in our DNA, waiting to be uncovered? How many other stories of survival or annihilation are buried in the past? This is what makes history so powerful. It isn't just a record of kings and monuments. It's a mirror showing us what humanity is capable of, both creation and destruction. If this story made you think differently about our past, consider subscribing for more deep explorations into the mysteries of human history. Share this with someone who thinks the ancient world was simple or peaceful, because the truth is far stranger. And let me know in the comments. Do you think we've really outgrown the Neolithic logic of survival, or is it still with us today, hidden under new names? Because history isn't just behind us, it's inside us.